Checking the headphones, checking the microphone. Hello, everybody. Can you tell me if I'm coming in loud and clear? Let me just say hello, say I can hear you, Jamie. Checking the camera up there. Excellent. Okay, what else? Checking my glasses. Look, this is a special day. I am, for the very first time in my life, I'm going to put my glasses on for a webinar. Never done this before. Never worn my glasses in a webinar. Never worn my glasses on stage during a talk. Never worn my glasses in the classroom as a teacher. Would you like to see my glasses? This is really funny because I bought them months ago, and I've still not got around to wearing them. I always forget I have them, but my eyesight's getting worse and worse. So I just put them on a little while ago. Look at this. This is complete accident. They're the same color as the Lesson Stream brand. That is a total accident, I promise. What do you think? I'm not going to wear them until I have to, because of something I want to read. So lovely to see you all. Thank you for joining. Just so you know, if you've never done a live stream before, it's a little bit maybe less intrusive for you, because it's not like Zoom, you know? In Zoom, we're all used to being there on screen and making that decision. Do I turn my video on or do I turn it off? With a live, you can turn it on and you can just go and do your thing. You can have it on in the background if you like. You can treat me as if I'm your radio. I'm happy with that. I don't mind. And so, yes, thank you. Nice to see you all. I'm just here. I was just passing some time, killing the last few minutes on Wordle. Has anyone here become addicted to Wordle yet? It is quite addictive, or addicting, as they say in the USA. I have to admit, it's not really grabbed me yet, but it seems to be taking the world by a storm. Olivia has just said yes. and it's a very simple game. If you've not heard of Wordle, if you've not played it, I don't know where you've been, but everybody's talking about Wordle. My friend Rollo, he keeps on pestering me. He keeps saying, Jimmy, have you tried Wordle? It's so good. And I've tried it a few times and I've said, well, you know, it's all right. I can't quite get into it. And I said, what is it about it, Rollo, that you really, really like? And he says, well, I'm not sure. Just everybody else seems to be doing it. What sort of reason is that to be really into something? So do you know what I did? This morning I sent him a WhatsApp text and I said, today's Wordle is square. And he was really unhappy with me that I'd given him the answer to today's Wordle, because if you don't know, every day you've got a new word, you see. But then he thought about it, and square has got 6 letters, and I was just making fun, you see. It's a good trick. Try it to your best friend that's addicted to Wordle. Say today's Wordle is square. And what you mean is that if you don't know Wordle, this is going to make no sense to you at all. Just, you don't have to worry. Anyway, what is this all about? What's this all about today? Well, this is a talk that I've been giving recently called a story-based approach to authentic materials. I've given this talk to various online conferences over the last few months. And it's a talk that I kind of like. And I thought you might like it too. So I thought, well, you know, why not do it for you? And that's what we're going to do for the next 45 minutes or so. And the idea here is that, I mean, teachers tend to like authentic materials, don't we? Is that fair to say? I mean, I can't assume that we all do. But, you know, if we don't use authentic materials, then we are required to sticking to the course book for our entire duration, are we? Or maybe just going materials free, which is fine but difficult. But in my experience, most of us do sometimes go off-piste, to use a skiing metaphor, and go search in materials, whether we're talking texts, articles, podcasts, songs, images, art, videos, short films, adverts, all that kind of thing. Is there anybody here who does never use authentic materials? And by the way, when I say authentic materials, I mean materials which are not designed for language learning or language teaching. Course books are designed for language learning, for language teaching. Whether or not they fulfill their objective, I don't know, but authentic materials are not designed for that purpose. So we've got to kind of try to find ways to tame the beast. And if I ask you a question, why do we turn to authentic materials? What would make you choose to put your course book to one side and go and search for something online, for example, a piece of authentic material? Why would we do it? I mean, traditionally, I think we're led to believe, perhaps, aren't we, that the reason we go after authentic materials is because that is where the authentic language is, and that may be so. Authentic language comes with its own problems, because authentic language can be full of high frequency words or items, cultural ideas, idiomatic language items, and maverick kind of rule breaking, and it can be difficult. We've got to know to tame the beast. Carol says significant learning. I'm not sure. Maybe explain. Hello, Carol. Long time no see. Maybe you could explain what you mean by significant learning, if you can fit it in a comment. But I think there's three reasons. The first one, yes, let's call it authentic language. That would be my first reason for going in search of authentic materials. The second reason is that if you've ever opened a course book recently, would you agree with me that everything is done for you? There's this step-by-step procedure of what you have to do and what you have to tell your students to do and what your students have to do. And it's so detailed sometimes that you think, where's the space? Where's the room for me? What is my role as a teacher? It's almost as if you follow the steps exactly, there's no place for you, the teacher. Of course, experienced teachers know how to deal with that. But maybe if you're less experienced, I don't know, maybe not. Maybe you're being forced to get through the entire course book in a semester, in which case maybe there's no time for the teacher to be a teacher. I don't know. Antonia, and this is interesting, says the course book is a path. Authentic materials is closer to real lives, which leads me, Antonia, to the third reason I would say. For me, and I suspect for many teachers, the reason for going in search of authentic materials is that's where the best stories are. That's where the best stories are. I wonder if you agree with that. I'm not going to assume that you do, but that's where the best stories are. Ellie says space for thought. I mean, if we're talking about something which is thought-provoking, story for me is one of the best ways to do it. A good story is one of the best ways to get people to think. Stories connect with issues for discussion, perspectives for exploration. And so, this is something in my experience that's too often missing from course books. I don't want to make this a blanket generalization, because I know there's some course book writers that take a lot of pride in their work and they would argue otherwise, but often the course books I pick up and look through are kind of lacking in something which is closer to our real lives, as Antonia puts it, story. So let me just explain what this is going to be all about for the rest of this session. I've got three pieces of material, three pieces of authentic material. One of them is an image. One of them is a short book. Let's call it a written text. And the third one is a video. So these are kind of representative of materials in general, video, image, text, let's say. And what we're going to do is we're going to explore them one at a time. And we are going to look at some ideas. At the very end of the session, I'm going to give you some principles. You see, something to maybe point out here. The title of this is A Story-Based Approach to Authentic. Look at that. I've made a mistake, haven't I? And I never noticed it until now. The title on that slide is A Story-Based Approach to Authentic Videos. That's a mistake, Nobody pointed it out. Negative points. It should be a story-based approach to authentic materials. And I was thinking, maybe it should have been a story-based mindset, because maybe rather than a sort of practical approach, and there is going to be a lot of practical stuff here, but really I think at times we're dealing with a mindset meaning the way you think about something. And at the end of this session, I've got 5 principles that really demonstrate this, a kind of mindset that we can, a way of thinking about authentic materials that I hope will be quite useful. Let me give you just one example before we get to the end, right? Just one example. I think that often when teachers are working with a piece of authentic material, whether it's an image, a text, or video, often one of the mistakes, and I will call it mistake, that we make is that we have our grammar, or we come to it with our grammar goggles. We've got this question in mind: what grammar can I teach with this piece of material? And when that question, when that mindset is at the foreground of your brain, I think you're going to miss opportunities. So if I hear a teacher saying, for example, I'm going to use this image to teach models of deduction, and I'm going to say, well, wait a minute, let's step back. Let's see let's find the story first. Let's get students engaged with it first. Let's try and immerse students in language first. And if models of deduction come out of that, great, but let's not put that right into the foreground, because bad grammar teaching kills storytelling. I quite like that. Bad grammar teacher kills the story. So good evening and good afternoon, some newcomers here. Nice to see you all. So let's start with number one. Piece of authentic material, number 1. And this is Streaker. Hello, Lisa. I saw Andy as well. So hello. A few people have not. And hello, Esther. Hello, Evie. Those are the only people I can see in my screen right now. Okay, Streaker. Now, if you're in the Lesson Stream Facebook group, and I know many of you are, this is a question I asked last week. Who knows what a streaker is? And I was actually quite happy, quite delighted to discover that if you don't share a cultural background, the same cultural background as me, if you're not from United Kingdom or the USA or Canada or Australia, let's say, you probably won't know what a streaker is, because it's a very cultural term. And the fact that I discovered that if you don't come from a sort of Anglo-cultural, have an Anglo-cultural background, then you probably don't know what this is. This allows for a fantastic entrance to this activity, because what I've got here is an image. It's actually a photograph, and this photograph is in one of my favorite books. This is called The Photo Book. The Photo Book. I was given this book for my Christmas by my mum exactly 32 years ago. And I did a webinar last week to Poland and ripped the cover. Look at that. I ripped the cover. And 32 years old, and I ripped the cover for a group of Polish teachers. I don't know what that says about Polish teachers. Don't know. But be careful with them, perhaps. But anyway, I've sellotaped it, and the cover is back. I don't know why books need covers. I mean, what? I guess you would say to protect them, but then to protect them against what? Zombies? Zombies don't go for books usually, do they? They want to eat brains, so books are safe. Anyway, in this book, there is a photograph. Not surprisingly, because it is a book called The Photo Book. There's actually, in this book, there are approximately 500 photographs. And my favorite one, I don't know if I can say this is my favorite one, but it's definitely one of my favorites. It's difficult to have a favorite. Is a photograph that was taken in 1974. I wonder how old you were in 1974. Tell me your age. How old were you in 1974? And I could ask my students to guess how old I was in 1974. I was alive. But this photograph was taken in 1974. And the subject of the photograph is a streaker. Remember, that's the title of this activity, a streaker. -1 wasn't born yet, not born. Galina was 10. A lot of you are very happy to admit your age here. So I'll tell you, I was, Lisa, we're the same age. Carol, -1. I was 2 years old. Galina was 6. Daniel was -12. Hello, Daniel. And so I was 2 years old in 1974. And this is such a good photograph. In fact, this was actually, it has been referred to as the photo of the decade. So in the entire decade of the 1970s, it has been said this is the best photograph in that decade. It won a number of awards. It won Time Magazine Photograph of the Year. It also won a World Press Photography Award. And if you know what a streaker is, great. But assuming that you don't, I would invite you to ask me, you being my students, me being your teacher, 20 questions to work out what a streaker is and what is happening in this photograph. I can give you clues. I could ask you to think about the photograph genre. Perhaps it's photojournalism. Perhaps it's a portrait. Perhaps it's travel photography. Perhaps it's fashion photography. Perhaps it's a sport photograph. I could invite you to think about, is it a funny picture? Is it a serious picture? Perhaps it's a horrific picture. And I could give you a clue. I could give you a clue that the man who is the streaker, who is in the center of this image, has just been arrested. He has just been arrested. Why has he just been arrested? Well, he's been arrested for streaking, because streaking is a crime. So what is this crime and what does it involve? What does it entail? I'm going to show you this picture. Okay, such a good picture. Photographer's name is Ian Bradshaw. He's an American photographer. He took this photograph in 1974 at Twickenham Stadium, which is near London. This was during a rugby match in February of that year. Very, very cold day. And you can see that I've taken some effort to cover up that part of the photograph which might not be appropriate for you. You might be shocked. Just let me ask you, who has seen this photograph before? Just say yes or no. Have you seen this photograph before? Say yes or say no. What is so great about a picture like this? Any photograph that is potentially the photograph of the decade will have so much written about it. There are so many stories surrounding it. And so one of the principles here that I'd like to share with you in working with an image like this is to go in search of stories. And it sounds very simple to say this, but all too often I see teachers, they stick to the photograph, they stick to the image, they stick to what they see. And we spend time thinking about how we can use that picture in the classroom. Step outside, go online, go in search of stories about it. Who's seen this? So let me just see. We've got a Daniel, yes. Lisa, yes. Carol, no. Ellie, yes. J-Ray, no. Esther, no. Galina, no. Alfonso, maybe. Michael, hello, Michael. Michael, yes. Antonia, yes. Andy, of course. Evie, no. Daniela, yes. Mac, yes. Patricia, no. So it looks like maybe 50-50. I wonder if this is cultural as well. I've shown this to a few friends of mine who are British, and most of them have seen it. I wonder if I were to show it to some Spanish friends, what they would say. So I don't know. That's possible. I always like it if I can introduce my students to something new. So if they've not seen it, great. Now, I mentioned stepping outside of the picture and going in search of a story. So I've done that. I've gone I've stepped outside the picture. I've gone and searched for story. And what you can see right here on the screen is what I refer to as a story pathway. This is a story pathway. Hello, Debbie. This is a technique that I use quite a lot as a classroom storyteller. And if you are on, or if you've taken part in the Lesson Stream story course, this is a technique that we've mentioned a few times. It's coming. And it's also a technique that I've used many times in my lesson plans. The idea is very simple. This is a sequence, a series of words or phrases that students are going to meet when they hear the story. And importantly, they're in the chronological order, the order in which they're going to hear them. It's very simple. And this allows me to do three things. Number one, it allows me to bring into play a lot of the potentially unknown language that students are going to meet and deal with it. In other words, to pre-teach it or maybe to prime it. That's the first thing it allows me to do. The second thing is it's great for comprehension because students, assuming that they are either familiar with these terms or at least become familiar with them, they then have this idea of where the story's going. Even though it's a very vague, blurry kind of idea, they don't really know, they still have some kind of narrative in their mind, as unformed as it may be. That's the second thing. The third thing is that in some cases, this would provide me, the teacher who's about to tell the story, with some cues. It allows me to refer to what you see in front of you, and it provides me with kind of notes so I could tell the story and just make sure that I include each of these items in the story that I tell. This is another thing that we'll be looking at in the Lesson Stream story course. Now, what I'm going to do then is I'm actually going to read the story from a text. So I'm not going to go notes free. I'm actually going to read this story to you from a text that I have prepared. And importantly, the text that I have prepared comes from one single article that I found online. It was a great article. It basically had everything you needed to know about that image. So what I did with the article is I copy, I pasted, I deleted, I put things into shape, and I made a story. I created a narrative text, which is effectively the description of one of the people who is involved in the photograph. Does this make sense? Let me say it again. So I found this text online, a very, very information-packed text. I have reworked it to create a narrative text, a first-person account of somebody who is involved in this photograph. Given that you know that, whose words do you think you are going to hear now that you've read the various words and phrases from the text? Whose words are these, do you think? That's your thinking task. Okay, let me read this for you. Okay, so here's my text. It was a cold spring. Sorry, it was a cold Saturday in spring 1974. I'm going to start again because this is the point where I need my glasses, my Lesson Stream blue glasses, which if you joined late was absolutely not intentional. I bought these. I've just put them on for the first time today and realized that they are Lesson Stream blue. I probably wouldn't have chosen this color if that had occurred to me at the time. Okay, that's better. I can actually see what I'm reading now. Okay. It was a cold Saturday in spring 1974, and I was sent to Twickenham Stadium to cover a rugby match between England and France. I expected to shoot nothing more than an exciting game, but instead I returned with an iconic photograph that captured the start of a cultural phenomenon. Now, it was halftime, and most of the other photographers had gone to get a cup of tea and keep warm. Suddenly, I realized that something was going on. I could hear roars of laughter coming from the stands, and when I looked up, I saw this young bearded man running across the pitch as naked as the day he was born. He was soon surrounded by policemen and was marched towards me. I pointed my camera and began shooting, and as I did, a thought occurred to me. How can I possibly get a picture of this X-rated scene that a newspaper will publish? Every time I pressed the button, the streaker was overexposed. I thought, I've got to get one frame wherein his private parts are covered. I really like the fact that the streaker has outstretched arms. It makes him look like Jesus. I also like the gentleman in the background, comically running towards the scene with a coat, determined to put an end to this outrageous behaviour. I wasn't aware of him at the time. The photo caused an immediate sensation. It was printed in many different publications and countries. I earned a £100 bonus and won numerous awards, including the World Press Photo of the Year. Although it's my most famous photograph, in a way, it was the easiest picture I've ever taken. I was in the right place at the right time with the right lens and film in the camera. Let's just have a look at this photograph again. What do you think of that? Did you like my story? My question is, whose words were those? I know you know. Will your students know? Will they be able to work it out? That those words, whose words are those? It's a slightly trick question, isn't it? Because students are maybe deciding who in the picture. But of course, Galina says it is the photographer, of course. Exactly. So there's also a little problem there, isn't there? Did you notice the problem? I've tried to include a little kind of problem if you were able to process all the details in my text and also look at the image. The problem, what was the key thought that the photographer was having as he shot that scene in front of him? What was he thinking? He was thinking, let me just read it out again. He was thinking, and I'll repeat this, how can I possibly get a picture of this X-rated scene that a newspaper will publish? Every time I pressed the button, the streaker was overexposed. I thought, I've got to get one frame where his private parts are covered. Ellie's asking where the photograph is from. Hello, Daria. Ian Bradshaw was a freelance photographer, but he was sent to Twickenham Stadium on that day in 1974 to shoot for The Mirror, which is a British tabloid newspaper. So I'm going to guess that The Mirror owned the rights to it. But then I think ultimately the Mirror probably sold it on to the likes of Keddie perhaps, or Associated Press. I'm not sure. But I know that Ian Bradshaw doesn't own the rights to it. And I don't think the Mirror does, but I'm not too sure. So what's the problem then? How did this picture appear in the media all over the world if this man had his private parts showing? What's behind the post-it note? Who wants to see? Who wants to guess what's behind the post-it note? Some of you know. I think that some people might think, what if students have seen this before? They'll know. Well, they'll think they'll know, but I don't know. Some of you have seen this before and you still don't know what's behind the sticker. Am I right? I'm trying to get it up. Here we are. This is what makes this photograph so special. It's that detail which really is absolutely crucial to this picture. And also the photographer drew attention to this character in the background running towards us with his coat, which also makes it so special, isn't it? There's one photographer called Dan McCullen, who's an absolute hero of mine, and he said that this is the photograph that he wishes he had taken. So yes, Daniel got it right. You knew it was the helmet. So the point I want to make here is that we're working with an image, but really we're working with a story. Don't feel that you're obliged to just work with that square rectangular picture. Go outside the frame and go and look for stories about it. And that doesn't just apply to images. That doesn't just apply to photographs. That could apply to songs as well. I think songs are overused as the lyrics of songs are overused as gap fills. Sometimes a song will include a story, and you can actually tell the story of the song to your students and then let them hear the song, or prepare a text that has the lyrics. It's such a lovely surprise for students if they're working with a story. They don't know it comes from a song, and then you let them hear the song. Or similarly, all those stories about songs. It's lovely to work with a story about a song and then later to hear the song. So go in search of stories about materials. That's one of the first things. The other principle here to draw attention to is I made use of a text to produce that first person narrative account. I didn't feel obliged to use the text as it was given to me. I adapted it. And that's the second one. I think we often think of texts, authentic texts, that we've got to use them as they are. But there's nothing sacred about authentic texts. We can adapt them. And when I say adapt them, that doesn't necessarily mean simplify them. It can mean adapt them for what you want to do with them. It can mean make the language and the text more useful, not just more simple for your learner's level, but more useful. Look what Michael's just posted and shared with them. Michael said at halftime, Australian Michael O'Brien, that's the name of the streaker, became the first English streaker when he raced across the pitch in front of the Queen for a £10 bet. Ian Bradshaw was the only photographer at the end of the pitch where the police arrested O'Brien, who was subsequently fined £10 by the local magistrate. 32 years later, the Bobby gave to the Australian guy, a current businessman, his helmet as a gift. Michael, I know this story inside out. And there's a couple of facts here that I could dispute. It wasn't there was a royal member present, but it wasn't actually the Queen. And he wasn't the only photographer that got the scene as well. There were other photographers that captured it, but not one of them got an image with a composition that even came close to Ian Brady's, and you can see some of these online as well. But that's an interesting one about the 2006. The Bobby gave the one of the tasks, the follow-up task, and this activity is coming the weekend, is that students then have to use the same text, and they have to basically do exactly the same thing I did. That is, turn the text into a first-hand account of the photographer. They've got to do the same thing, but for Michael O'Brien, who is the streaker. So they've got to work with the text and reshape it, create a first-hand account of Michael O'Brien's words. I think that's a really nice task that I've never used before. And the text that I've found lends itself really, really well to this. And as I mentioned, I'll be sharing this lesson plan with you in the Lesson Stream membership on Friday. Great. Let's move on. Let's move on to piece of material number 2. And piece of material number 2, let me just start with a quick story. I love practical jokes. I don't know about you. That doesn't mean that I like playing practical jokes on people. I'm not actually very good at that. I don't really like it when people play practical jokes on me, but I love practical jokes as a sort of source of stories, because it's such a good sort of discussion point. It's one of those in the lesson stream membership in the story course, we refer to them as contagious stories. Everybody's got a story about a practical joke that they witnessed, a practical joke they played on somebody, maybe as a child, or a practical joke that somebody played on them. I know I've got a few of my own. And every practical joke ever played is a potential story. And I was working through, or I was reading a Wikipedia entry for practical jokes. Just, I don't know, I sometimes go off on Wikipedia rabbit holes. Do you ever do that? And Wikipedia actually is a fantastic source of stories. It's it's been one of my favorites. And it just occurred to me the other day, I've never told anyone this before, that Wikipedia is one of my favorite sources for stories. I wonder what you think of that. And I was, so as I said, I was reading the Wikipedia entry for practical joke, and it still does, it has a section marked famous examples. And one of the examples that it cites is about this character. He was an American bohemian artist from last century called Waldo Pierce. I'd never heard of him myself, but the story goes like this. Waldo Pierce moved to Paris, and he made friends with this woman who lived in the same apartment as him. And I'm reading between the lines here. I think that because they became such good friends, she trusted him, and she gave him the spare key to her apartment. I guess that maybe so that he could water the plants, maybe so that he could let himself in if she needed something to be done, or maybe if she forgets this, we all like to leave a spare key with a neighbor, don't we? So that's what she did. Now it's time for Waldo Pierce to play a practical joke, because Waldo Pierce decided to give her a gift. This woman, she loved animals, and so he gave her the gift of a tiny little tortoise. He must have bought it in a Parisian pet shop, a tiny little tortoise. And she was delighted with this gift. And then Waldo Pierce started to let himself into her apartment when she was not there. Quite naughty, very naughty. And he would replace this tortoise with a slightly larger one, you see. And he'd do this every few days or every few weeks until this tortoise was starting to exhibit miracle growth. And this woman could not believe what was going on. This pet tortoise, which was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually, this was the biggest tortoise in Paris. And it had grown so big so quickly. And the woman was actually delighted. And she would show it to anybody who was interested and tell them the story of her miracle growing tortoise. And when it was as big as it could be, I guess Waldo Pierce couldn't find any bigger tortoises in the Parisian pet shops. He reversed the process, and he started to let himself into this woman's apartment when she wasn't in town, or wasn't in her flat, and replaced it with slightly smaller ones. And so instead of the miracle growth that it previously exhibited, it started to become the incredible shrinking tortoise. And the woman wasn't quite as happy as she was. She was very worried about this tortoise. Now, I don't know what you think of this practical joke. I'm very skeptical of it. I think that the truth probably isn't quite what was reported, but I do love it as a story. And it's a question that I would ask my students if I was going to share this story with them. Let me just show you here that this is the story as it's reported, as I mentioned, in Wikipedia, in the entry for practical jokes. The famous example, one practical joke by the American painter and bohemian character Waldo Pierce. While living in Paris in the 20s, he made a gift of a very big turtle to the woman who was the current concierge of his building. This tells in a slightly different way. I've heard different accounts of this story. So you see, the fact that this one says that he started by making it bigger and then made it smaller would indicate that, a story you can never, like this, of this nature, it's always difficult to know exactly what happened. The woman doted on the turtle and lavished care on it. A few days later, Waldo Pierce substituted a somewhat larger turtle for the original one. He continued for some time with the surreptitious introduction of larger and larger turtles into the woman's apartment. The concierge, beside herself with happiness, displayed her miraculous turtle to the entire neighborhood. Pierce then began to sneak in and replace it with smaller and smaller ones, to her bewildered distress. Okay, I misread it. He started off with quite a big turtle. That was all. I don't know why he did that. I would have started with a smaller one myself. And they talk about turtles. I talk about tortoises. I think Americans don't differentiate between turtles and tortoises. For me, a turtle is one that lives in the sea. A tortoise is one that lives in the land. But I think in international context, it's much more common to talk about turtles. But what's so interesting here, you can see that I really like this story, and so did Roald Dahl, because Roald Dahl used this story for the inspiration for his book, S.A.O. Trot. And I wonder, is there anybody here who knows why this book is called S.A.O. Trot? I didn't know until I read it, but I've always been a big fan of Roald Dahl's. I grew up in his stories, and so I decided that I had to order this book on Amazon. I didn't even know it existed. And interestingly, S.A.O. Trot is the very last book that Roald Dahl wrote in his lifetime. So I ordered it on Amazon Prime, next day delivery, and I was really looking forward to getting it. I actually couldn't wait, because in my mind I was thinking, okay, I know about the practical joke that this guy played on this woman in Paris in the 1920s, and I know that Roald Dahl took inspiration from it for this story, S.A.O. Trot. But how exactly does the story work? And I really wanted to know. And I got the book. Here it is right here. And I couldn't wait to find out, who are the characters, Where do they live? What's the relationship between them? And maybe most importantly, why does one of the characters want the other one to think that their pet tortoise, or turtle if you prefer, is growing or shrinking? Is it another practical joke? And if it's not a practical joke, then what is it? What's the motivation behind this potentially nefarious act? And so I really wanted to know this. And I got the book and I read it in one sitting. And then I thought, okay, that was quite good. It was quite interesting. But because I'd been primed to think all of these thoughts, to ask all of these questions, I think I was in quite a good position to take a more sort of critical stance when I read it. And what I really wanted to know was, how have other people reacted to this story? So I went on to Amazon and read all the reviews. I read as many different posts about this book as I could read, and it was a really interesting little sort of exercise. And so what I then did is I designed an activity for students, which is in the resources section in the lesson stream membership. It's a very simple one, really. Let me show you what it looks like. It looks like this. You give students the story. You tell students about the story of the practical joke, that is, the one that I told you, the one that I got from Wikipedia, the one that involves this naughty, naughty man called Waldo Pierce. So students are actually given the story. You as the teacher, you tell them the story as I told it to you, but that's there waiting for them as well in a more kind of prepared text form. So if they didn't understand the story when it came from their teacher, they've got a second attempt when you give it to them on text. And then you see what's so good about this is Roald Dahl only based the storyline on that practical joke. He used the storyline as the basis of the plot. He was inspired by it, but he didn't use it, or he wasn't a slave to the events of it. You see, he played with it. And so you put your students into the shoes of a writer. It could be a writer, it could be a filmmaker, it could be a playwright, it could be a screenwriter. And what they're doing here is they're not writing a story. This is very important. They're not actually creating a story. They are designing a storyline. And there's a difference here. So you put students into groups, into pairs, if you like, or maybe groups, trios, and you give them the task. You've got to use this practical joke, the text that came from Wikipedia, for the basis of a storyline that you are creating for children. It might be a children's film, it might be a children's book. It doesn't matter. But the task is all there. They've got to think about who the people are, who are the characters in this story, where does the story take place? Most importantly, why does one of the characters want the other character, or one of the other characters at least, to think that their tortoise, if it is a pet tortoise, is displaying miraculous growth or miraculous shrinkage? What is the motivation behind that? In this book, it's not actually a practical joke. What are the challenges that the character faces in order to do this? And what happens as a result? How does this story end? And when you put students into groups and when you put their heads together, there's a lot of good ideas can come out from this. And finally, students share their ideas. They discuss their storylines that they've planned and prepared. This works really well for teenagers and for adults to maybe prepare or plan or design a story for children. So this is an activity for teenagers and adults. And finally, once they've shared their storylines, shared their work with each other, you can then direct them to Wikipedia, where they can read a synopsis of this book for themselves, or if they prefer, they can buy the book online, or if you've got some kind of reading club in your school, and you can maybe try and order this book. And then, as I mentioned, finally, they're primed. Students are primed to really take a more critical approach to the story. And there's some follow-up questions, because it is actually slightly controversial, the story. Does it, we often assume that children's stories are going to instill values in children. Roald Dahl doesn't always do that. And that allows us to really talk about this and become more critical of the book. Students, as I mentioned, are more primed to be more critical of the book than they would have been had they just found it and picked it up and read it for themselves. So that's the second piece of material. It's this book here. We're going to move on to the last part. And the last part, let me just take a sip of water here. The last part is based on an experience that I had myself. I wonder if you know this story. I may have told it to you before. It's a story. I'm going to tell you this story. It's a true story. Something that happened to me quite a few years ago in the days before COVID. I wonder if you remember those days. The days before COVID. I'd been in Scotland visiting my parents, and I had to take a train to Edinburgh. I don't know if you know the train station in Edinburgh. Does anyone know the name of the train station in Edinburgh? It's called Waverley Station. And I arrived probably about half an hour early, so I had some time to kill. And so what I did, I went to buy a newspaper so I could do the crossword, something I like doing every now and again. I bought a coffee and a packet of biscuits. And then I went to the waiting room to wait for my train and do my crossword. So what I want you to do is picture the scene, all right? Imagine this. Here I am sitting at a table in the waiting room. In front of me is my newspaper open at the crossword page. On my right is my coffee, still too hot to drink. In front of me, more or less in the middle of the table, is my packet of biscuits. Now, sitting opposite me, there's this guy. And he's a normal looking guy. And I did not expect him to do what he did. You'll never guess what he did. Here's what he did. He leaned forward to reach across the table. He picked up the biscuits, my packet of biscuits. He opened them. He took one out and he popped it in his mouth. Now I'm thinking WTH. And I had no idea what to do. I mean, I'd never had to deal with a situation like this in my life. So what I did was absolutely nothing. I let it go. And after, I don't know, 30 seconds or a minute, I decided I'm going to have a biscuit, one of my biscuits. So I took the packet, took a biscuit out of the packet, had to pretend not to notice that it was already miraculously open, and I ate biscuit and enjoyed it. And then this guy, he did it again. He took another biscuit, and I was absolutely furious inside. But because I'd said nothing the first time, I couldn't say anything the second time. And this is how it continued, almost like a game of biscuit tennis. And God, there was so much tension in the air. There was one moment I remember when our eyes met, just for a moment, and we both looked away immediately. Such was the tension in this air. Eventually, we finished the biscuits. His train was announced, and he stood up and he left, and I sat back, breathed out the sigh of relief, and then it was my turn to get my train. And I took my last sip of coffee, and I stood up, and I took my newspaper off the table, and underneath the table was my packet of biscuits unopened. Now, Vaso says, interestingly, this reminds me of an ad, which is quite interesting. I wonder if that would mean that means that my story influenced some advertisers somewhere. Now, let me just before we move on, and I tell you what this is all about, I just want to explain a couple of things. This is a lesson plan called Biscuit Thief. And this lesson plan, and indeed all of the lesson plans that we're looking at today, are available in the Lesson Stream membership. And I happen to know there are a few people present at this live stream who are members. I'm looking at you, Michael, and Lisa, and Dan, and Debbie, and Daria. And if anyone else I've not seen, hello there. And so as soon as you join the Lesson Stream membership, you get instant access to the entire library of lesson plans. And there are currently 88. 3 of them are there in front of you. Streaker, which is going live on Friday. SEO Trot, which is one of them, and Biscuit Thief, which I'm about to talk you through now. So you get instant access to all of these downloadable lesson plans. They're all there on PDFs. They're all story-based. They all, they aim to use story, whether it's an image or an online video, a short film, an urban legend. They all aim to engage students with the story and get them speaking, writing, problem solving, discussing, collaborating, language learning, all that sort, and doing stuff, all that kind of thing. And when you join the membership, you also get access to the story course, the Lesson Stream story course, which is a course designed to show you how to use story to engage your students, get them doing things, and also to help you to develop as a storyteller, to develop your storytelling skills and confidence, and help your students do the same. We've been working through this, and we're 1/3 of the way through the course right now. If you join, you get instant access to all of the videos, all of the handouts, all of the tasks that we've been doing so far. And when you join the membership, you also become a member of the Fishbowl. This is our online community. It's where all the discussion happens, where when I set tasks for you in the course, this is where you share them. This is where you can comment and ask questions about the lesson plans. You make friends, make connections, network, and most importantly, share stories. Also, once a week, I send out the Fishbowl Weekly, which just tells you what's happening. This is a very important part of your membership, because in Blessing Streams membership, it's a constant roller coaster of stories, and this is the kind of weekly wrap up of all of that. So that's what you get. We also have one webinar per week, sometimes two, sometimes they're guest webinars. Last year we had Scott Thornbury give his very first talk on story, which was very interesting to take part in, and you can access all the recordings. One of my favorite guest webinars was this woman. I know a few of you here were there. Hannah's a new member, of course. Hannah, hello there, and we're looking forward to meeting you at the next event a week on Sunday in person. Catherine Robinson is the senior editor at Hello Magazine Online, and she joined us for one of the most fascinating guest webinars I ever took part in, behind the scenes of what goes on at Hello Magazine. And all of these are there for you to access and watch as soon as you join. So you get the 4 things: you get the story course, you get the lesson plan library, instant access to all of these, the webinars, the Fishbowl community, for the price of 1 coffee per week, or a subscription to Netflix, and I know that a lot of you will subscribe to Netflix. And if you're going to do it, please do so before the end of this month, because once you're a member, that price cannot go up, okay? And at the end of the month, the price is going up. So as long as you are a member before the price goes up at the end of this month, you will always, the price will never go up for you. I can't. Does that make sense? If you're already a member, what I'm saying is, don't worry, the price is not going up for you. It will only be for new members who join after February. All right. So please do so before the end of this month. So did you like my story? About the biscuit thief? I mean, a few questions that maybe you could ask your students. Do you think this event really happened to your teacher? If not, where do you think the story came from? And in fact, you're absolutely right. This is not something that happened to me. This is a story that I found online. Who was it in the Lesson Stream membership in the Fishbowl that introduced us to it? It was Jenny. It was Jenny that shared this story with us. As you heard the story, what kind of biscuits did you think of? I wonder if you were influenced by the slide of those Oreo cookies. Imagine this situation happened to you. Imagine you were the person who bought a packet of biscuits and went to the waiting room, and some stranger helped himself or herself. How would you react? How would the series of events progressed? How would the story have ended? Maybe you could rewrite the story accordingly. Is there anything we can learn from it? Have you ever had an argument with a stranger in a public place? Or have you ever been witness to one? Tell us about it. Now, sometimes there's a tendency for us to think that teacher-led storytelling, I go into the classroom, I tell my students a short story, like the one I shared with you, The Biscuit Thief. Some teachers might feel uncomfortable. They might think, well, it's too teacher-centered. I would say to that, if you're using a short story as a text, as a way to get students engaged, as a way to introduce issues for discussion, for tasks for students to do, then how could that ever be teacher-centered? It's a crazy idea to even think that it could be. Teachers might feel uncomfortable of sharing a short story like that, which might have taken maybe 3 minutes for the teacher to tell, and yet they'd be very comfortable showing a video like this, which is, look at that video in the top left of the corner. It's an animation called Snack Attack, and it's basically the same story. And it tells the story of this elderly woman that you can see. She finds the biscuits. She goes to sit on a bench on the platform, and this young kid helps himself to them. Now, it's the story. It's a great video. I love it. The only problem is it lasts 5 whole minutes, and there is no spoken words. There's no monologue, there's no dialogue. It is absolutely language free. And I would ask teachers, why would you prefer to use a language free video, which is 5 minutes long, and yet feel uncomfortable or not want to use a short story from your teacher? And they might say things like, oh, because students love stories. Or sorry, students love video. Well, that is not a good enough reason for me. Students love a lot of things. It doesn't mean we want to take them into the classroom. In any case, it's undermining yourself. You're underselling yourself. Your students are inherently interested in you, the teacher. And a short story from the teacher is an incredibly valuable text. And that's what it is. It's a very short text. Let me just tell you where I got this story from. Michael says, I'd be sick if I ate half a packet of biscuits. I always imagine it was one of those small packets of Oreos, Michael, although don't want you to think that I am not capable of eating a whole packet of biscuits on my own. Daniel says, you're also providing a great model for students. Exactly. You know, a short film like the one we're talking about here of the animation is a fantastic model for people who are working in the world of animation, if they're working as filmmakers. But I think that if we're looking at materials, a story text, an anecdote like this, which is an urban legend, is a much better way to present it. It's a much better stimulus. It's a much better, it's a model, is the word that Daniel says. It's a model text. And importantly, if you want your students to do stuff, if you want them to talk about the story, talk about the issues in it, then they're going to need language that was involved. And the language does not come from the video. However, the language comes from the text if it's delivered as a story. Now, I'm not saying you should do this or you shouldn't do that. I'm just saying, in my experience, there's so many more teachers who will be completely happy to use a 5-minute language-free video, but would never use a short story coming from their teacher. And I think that's a shame. I think that's, just let me tell you where this story came from originally. This book. This is a book by a man called Douglas Adams. And I'm sure some of you know this is part of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. Douglas Adams claimed that this incident, the biscuit thief incident, happened to him. And he published it in this book as a fiction. He said it really happened to him in a station in Oxford. And it's in this book. You can also see him on the David Letterman show. This is a video on YouTube. That's in the top right-hand corner of the screen. That's Douglas Adams in the foreground talking to David Letterman, and he's telling the story to David Letterman. So this is so valuable. We've got the story, which is written in this book. We've got the story as it's told to David Letterman. And it's what we can refer to as an urban legend, or maybe you can, maybe you can't. But interestingly, it's often disputed. People have said that, in fact, the story predates Douglas Adams' telling of it or inclusion of it in this book. There are people who have found iterations of that story at the turn of the 20th century. So maybe Douglas Adams stole it, or maybe it happened to him by chance. Things can happen to the two people, you know. Whatever the case, I love it. I think it's a great example of an urban legend, and it's such a fun thing to do, to tell a story to your students as if it happened to you, the teacher. Tell your students it possibly happened to you. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. And then you can tell it a second time. And this time they've got to spot clues. Were you a liar or were you telling the truth? And that's a meaningful reason to revisit the story, revisit the text and the language in us. There you go, Ellie. So I've got to wrap up now and give you the conclusion, give you my five principles One thing I didn't mention, I forgot to do as I got excited, just to mention, if you'd like to join the Lesson Stream membership, just go to lessonstream.com, and in the right hand side corner, join the membership. It's as simple as that. Okay, conclusion slide. Here it is. 5 principles. Number 1, when using authentic materials, whether it's an image, whether it's a song, whether it's a short film, whether it's a text, source stories about it. This is particularly relevant for images and songs, let's say. You don't have to be restricted to that rectangle. You know, even if you're using a viral video, which is 10 seconds long, language free, and you're thinking, how would I use that viral video? Source texts about it. Find stories which relate to it. So find the story in the materials. Number 2, adapt the text. You'll recall that I found that story, that article about the Ian Bradshaw photograph of the most famous streaker, and I adapted it. I adapted it for the text. I adapted it for the task. I also changed the language, not just to make it more simple, to make it more useful. There's nothing wrong with adapting texts, but do it well. Become aware of grammar blindness. When you're working with a piece of material, think, what's the story, and how can I use the story to immerse students in language? Immerse them in a two-way exchange, language from the text, language from the teacher, and language from themselves. You know, story is a perfect way to provide an immersive experience, an immersive linguistic experience. What I don't like that term. Sounds too marketery for your students, but you know what I mean. But don't, if you come to a piece of material looking for a language point, asking yourself the question, what grammar point can I teach with this piece of material? You're always going to miss out on better opportunities. Language will come. Grammar will emerge. Embrace teacher-led storytelling. That's what I've said. You are the most valuable and fundamental source of input language for your students. Use yourself. Use it. And finally, find your own story in the materials. Now, recall this book. The lesson plan was basically based on my own experience. Recall that I told you that I love practical jokes. I was reading this entry in Wikipedia. I found an example. I told you the story. It inspired me to buy the book. My thought process as I was waiting for the book, the questions that I asked, reading the book, and then going online and finding out some of the different opinions about it. That is my own story. And I used my own story as a kind of framework for the activity. And this was quite complicated. Sounds quite complex, but it doesn't have to be as complex as that. When I say find your own stories in the materials, it can be something as simple as this. When you're using let's say a video, don't just say to your students, watch this video, press play, then press pause, guess what happens next. Provide them with a context, share your own experience. How did you find the video? How did it find you? Say, for example, I've got this silly video I want to show you, all right? Now, the thing is, I think it's hilarious. When I saw it, I laughed a lot. But my girlfriend doesn't seem to share my enthusiasm for it. She doesn't like it. She thinks it's stupid. Okay. And after you've used it for maybe a video prediction activity, what happens next, for example, then you can ask students, so what do you think? Are you with me? Do you think it's funny? Or are you with my girlfriend? Do you think it's stupid? And if your students think it's stupid, they side with your girlfriend. It's just part of the fun. But that's so much more meaningful. That little bit of information, it's just an invitation for such a more meaningful experience than were you not to share it. Does that make sense? Any questions for anybody? Because that's taken us to the end of the session. There is my email, jamie@lessonstream.com. There's me on Instagram, which has been neglected of late. If you'd like to join the membership, just go to lessonstream.com. And if you've got any questions for me, now's the time to ask. If you forget about it, or if you think of something later, there's always the Facebook group, Lesson Stream Facebook group, or send me an email. I'm always happy to help. I'd like to say so many thanks to all of you for being here. Great to see so many of you. Yes, I'm waiting for 10 more seconds. 8 more seconds. Oh, this looks like a question. Alfonso says, after that wonderful learning experience in Norwich some years ago, your approach to English teaching changed so much that you can only be grateful. That makes me really happy to hear, Alfonso. I'd love to know what sort of ideas you've implemented. But that's lovely to hear. Thank you for telling us that. So thank you, Andy. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Esther. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Sophia. I've not said hello to some of you. Thank you, Natasha. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the fishbowl or in the lesson. Thank you, Carol. Always a pleasure. I'm glad you like the glasses. Take care now. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.